On the 2nd of May 2016, Leicester City were crowned champions of England following Tottenham's 2-2 draw with Chelsea. 5 years later, and they won the FA Cup and Community Shield against that year's Champions League finalists, and now just 2 more years down the line the Foxes are a second division side. This is the remarkable rise and fall of Leicester City. Now before I get started, this video is mainly focused on the recent history of Leicester, however it would only make sense to give a little bit of context to the club. Nicknamed the Foxes, they were founded in 1884 as Leicester Foss FC after the road they played their games at before moving to Filbert Street in 1891, a stadium that would go on to be their home for over 100 years. In 1894 they would be elected into the Football League with little to really speak about before a 1919 change of name to Leicester City. The 20s would then go on to be a successful period of time for the club, reaching the top tier for just the second time ever, with club record scorer Arthur Chandler firing them to a 3rd place finish in 1928 and a 2nd place one a year later, just a single point after the title, before they would then fall back into being a yo-yo club of sorts, rarely finishing higher than mid-table in the top tier or lower than that position in the 2nd. Over the years, the club saw a handful of great players come through the doors, including the likes of Gordon Banks and Gary Lineker. However, the Foxes were never able to win more than 3 League Cups, until we reached 2008, where for the first time in their history, Leicester were relegated to the 3rd tier. This relegation came after a spell of financial issues at the club, where just months after moving to their new stadium in 2002, the club would enter administration. The side was then saved by a Gary Lineker-led consortium, however it would continue to fall into a 1-0 loss to Millwall on the 13th of September 2008, represented the lowest point in the club's history. Following this loss though would be a run of 1 loss in 32 games, eventually winning the league and being promoted back to the Championship at the first time of asking. Nigel Pearson had been manager throughout that season, and after guiding Leicester to a playoff spot in their first season back in the 2nd tier, he would leave for Hull City, before the start of the 10-11 campaign saw Leicester being taken over by Thai billionaire Vishai, a moment that would change the course of the club forever. Midway through the next campaign, Nigel Pearson was brought back, once again guiding them back into the playoffs in his first full campaign, before going one further and winning the league title the next season with a remarkable points tally of 102. This success was powered by a number of shrewd signings, including the likes of Kasper Schmeichel, Wes Morgan, Danny Drinkwater, Jamie Vardy and Riyad Mahrez, who'd all joined the club following their takeover in 2010. And having returned to the Premier League for the first time in 11 years, the club were a more attractive destination, bringing in Marco Brighton and Danny Simpson from fellow Prem clubs Aston Villa and QPR, as well as miraculously managing the signing of treble winner Esteban Cambiasso from Inter Milan. Taking a look at the season, and bar a memorable 5-3 comeback victory against Man United, the Foxes saw very little success, hitting rock bottom by November and staying there all the way through to April. Over the course of the campaign, Nigel Pearson had been fired and then rehired. Just one player had reached 5 goals in the league, and they looked destined for the drop. But then came the great escape. 9 games, 7 wins, 18 goals scored and just 7 conceded. Leicester City were on top of the world going into the new season, where surely nothing could go wrong. Claudio Ranieri was then appointed manager in a decision that was mocked and ridiculed everywhere. Sure, in his prime the Italian was a good manager, but that was almost 2 decades previously, and he had just been sacked by the Greece national team after losing to the Faroe Islands. As well as this, the great Esteban Cambiasso had left the club despite having been integral to their survival, being replaced by an unknown French bloke called N'Golo Kante in a deal worth around £5 million. Christian Fuchs was brought in on a free, as well as Shinji Okazaki, who was signed to replace 2nd top scorer David Nugent, with a permanent deal for Robert Huth being secured before Gökhan Inler became the Foxes' final notable signing of the summer. Relegation favourites, having stayed up by the skin on their teeth the previous campaign, with a manager who was seemingly finished at the top level, and a starting 11 that had seemingly gotten worse, Leicester City were written off by many, even seeing odds of just 5,000 to 1 to win the league.
Brighton has delivered, knocked on by who? Mistake from Kabul!
After 2 games, they'd already spent 2 weeks at the top of the table. However, a 5-2 loss at home to Arsenal left the Foxes 6th in the table, and it seemed like their early title-challenging fairy tale was over, with the club expected to spend the rest of the season simply trying to stay up. They would then lose just 2 more games all season, seeing their star players breaking records, winning the league with just a couple games to spare, as they lifted silverware for the first time since the year 2000, and most importantly of all, proved to the world that anything is possible. The following summer would then see the start of a new process by Leicester aimed at allowing the club to continue to punch above their weight in a financially sustainable manner, nicknamed the Leicester model. One key player would be sold each summer, being replaced by various cheaper ones who could then be sold for more down the line or improve their squad. In 2016 it would be Kante that was sold, with Nampalys Mendy, Wilfred Ndidi and Islam Samani being amongst the arrivals. In 2017 it was Drinkwater sold and Maguire and Iheanacho brought in, followed by Mahrez and Maddison Pereira and Soyuncu in 2018. Maguire was sold in 2019 as Justin Perez and Tielemans were signed, and finally 2020 which saw the sale of Ben Chilwell and the arrivals of Castagna and Fofana, but most importantly the turning point in the future of Leicester. You see, after winning the league, Leicester dropped down to 12th before gradually climbing back up the table, eventually finishing 5th in 2019-20, having been in the top 4 all the way through to the penultimate match week. This was all down to the Leicester model I've just spoken about. However, as many of you will know, 2020 also saw a worldwide pandemic which caused a variety of issues for the club and probably hit them harder than any other team in the Premier League. Firstly, they of course lost huge revenues due to the lockdown. However, what sets them apart from every other side is that Leicester's owners essentially made all their money through their duty-free airport stores, which would of course have little to no income for the following 18 months. This then meant that player sales were having to be spread out across various areas of the club rather than focusing on just improving their squad, which actually brings me on to another point. You see, by replacing one player with multiple each year, not only were Leicester improving their depth and quality, but they were also increasing their wage bill massively, which by the 2021 season was equal to 85% of their revenue, making their model far less sustainable than it may initially seem. That being said though, this hadn't stopped their success on the pitch, where 8 games into the season Leicester was sat top of the table, and by the 15th of May they were still 4th ahead of arguably the biggest match in the club's history, where they faced up against Chelsea in the FA Cup final.
And Tielemans is going to hit it, and hit it beautifully. Chilwell is flying in from the left, and it's in! This is massive. This really is VAR's biggest moment. And when the lines are put in, the verdict is no goal. Maddison's beaten to it by James. For the first time ever, Leicester City win the FA Cup.
Despite going on to win the battle, Leicester would lose the war, as just days later Chelsea would beat them in the league, taking their Champions League spot with just 1 game to go for the 2nd season in a row. After this loss, Leicester became desperate to make it back into the tournament, spending significantly on Patson Daka and Boubakary Soumaré in the summer. However, they wouldn't sell anyone to make up for it, meaning to patch holes in the squad they turned to cheap signings in Ryan Bertrand and Yannick Vestergaard, both of which not really coming good and just further inflating an already bloated wage bill. And to make things even worse, Leicester would fail massively in their bid for Champions League football, finishing 8th and failing to qualify for any European campaign for the 22-23 season, where we all know the repercussions. The core of their squad had become stale, with long-term servant Kasper Schmeichel leaving for peanuts, as well as Wesley Fofana, who was sold on deadline day to ease financial worries. Wout Faes and Alex Smithies were also Leicester's only signings of the summer, leaving them without a proper number 1, causing a catastrophic start to this season. 9 games in, they'd won just once and were bottom of the league before momentarily dragging themselves back out of the drop zone, before a poor run of form saw them back in trouble, where Brendan Rodgers was sacked, having been appointed in 2019, being replaced by Dean Smith, who was unable to guide them back to safety, winning just 2 of his 8 games in charge. Unsurprisingly, Smith was sacked after the season, where on the 30th of June, Leicester saw the likes of Daniel Amati, Ryan Bertrand, Nampalys Mendy, Ayoze Perez, Kaglar Soyuncu and Yuri Tielemans all leave on a free, having spent a combined £100 million on them in transfer fees alone. As well as this, star player James Maddison left the club, Kelechi Iheanacho is on his way out, and Harvey Barnes is also expected to depart. And so right now things look bleak at the King Power, except I'm about to make a bold prediction. I think that Leicester are going to be back challenging for Europe in the next 3 or 4 years. The appointment of Enzo Maresca as manager should prove to be a very good one, and with signings like Harry Winks and Connor Cody, I'd expect them to absolutely walk the league. And on top of that, they've also been linked with various exciting youngsters like Man City's Callum Doyle, for example. And so to me, despite it seeming like the club have taken a huge step back with relegation, I think it could be the catalyst to 2 big steps forward. Now of course, I could easily be wrong. Their signings in recent years have been poor, they failed to capitalise on certain sales when they should have, and even if they do get promoted, there's every chance that Maresca Maresca would leave, but something in me is saying that won't happen and that they've not only learnt from their mistakes but also remember everything they did right. And so yes, as I've mentioned many times in my videos, it is impossible to predict the future, but I have a feeling that in a year's time I might just be doing a follow-up video to this one, where the word rise will feature one more time in the title.